team of experienced specialists. Our mechanics really know their stuff. That's why Vancouver Brake and Wheel can guarantee every brake job. Honesty, integrity, professional service, and we're BCAA approved. You get an honest brake at Vancouver Brake and Wheel.
Vancouver Brake and Wheel. Vancouver Brake and Wheel. BCTV. Our best show.
Good morning. We have three biggies for you this morning from a physical standpoint. A couple of real, genuine biggies. From 10 o'clock, you're going to meet a man who is shy normally about television, and his name is Ian Sinclair. He's the chairman of Trudeau's 6 and 5 committee, and apparently he's Keith Davies' propagandist on how the country must voluntarily meet or beat the 6 and 5 limit set down by the Trudeau government. That's Ian Sinclair. But even more importantly, from our point of view this morning, we have a man whose political enemies might say has had far too low a profile lately, who's been hiding in the weeds because he doesn't know what to do or say, and that is Dave Barrett, the leader of the N.D.P, who probably is confident that within 30 or 40 days he will be the new Premier of British Columbia. Dave Barrett first, after the break. Dave Barrett was the first N.D.P Premier of British Columbia between 72 and 75. And many people think he lost that election because his toughness involving labor disputes and organized labor. Mr. Barrett, it must be kind of comforting to be in opposition at the moment because of the fact that you don't have to make some of the really tough decisions that Bennett surely has to be making right now.
Well, some of the decisions that he has to make are based on problems that he's created himself. In terms of the labor area, let us be candid about it. Some of the problems that he's been faced with in the labor areas are welcome from his point of view politically. The manner in which he's handled the BCG-EU strike and the negotiations, in my opinion, lead to only one conclusion, that he did want some union bashing for political purposes.
Are you saying that he has been seeking and is still seeking a confrontation with the four-letter Fryer, the $65 million kid, so that he can go right to the polls next weekend, or this weekend?
From their point of view and their approach, the confrontation with any group at this point, on the basis of appearing to look tough on negotiations, was interpreted by them politically good. There's no doubt in my mind, in terms of the sequence of events that have transpired over the BCG-EU negotiations, that Bill Bennett was looking for confrontation so he could play a, quote, tough, unquote role.
Let's get down to some basics, Mr. Barrett, if I may. One, do you believe that there is a recession in British Columbia?
I believe there's a depression in Canada and in North America, and it certainly has affected us here in British Columbia. It is not entirely social credit's fault. A significant part of it is, but it is not entirely social credit's fault.
Would you wave a magic wand and push us into deficit spending, real deficit spending, so that we can avoid this potential horrible crisis with teachers and with hospitals?
There will be deficit spending no matter who is in power. The Socreds have admitted that. When we left office, there was close to $1 billion in rainy day funds set aside by the previous Social Credit Administration and added to by us. Those funds are all gone. Bill Bennett admitted on your program for the first time ever to anyone, to you, he admitted that they had been drawing on those funds for the last 2 years. They're gone. They are gone.
And he prognosticates that his people do $1 billion deficit by the end of the year.
That is correct. Now,
so therefore he's got to be tough. He's got to cut the school
no
costs.
Question about it. Now, no question about it that he's got to be tough and he's got to cut. But the question is, where do we cut? For 2 years now, 2 years in a row, the New Democratic Party group in Victoria has proposed cuts in advertising, in travel, in publications. Every single one we got recorded votes on. When we started these proposed cuts, the government laughed at us because we warned them that they were drawing too heavily on those surplus funds. We even had a chart that we put up in the House related to our cuts.
Let me see it now. Put it up if you like. These are the cuts you would have made.
Those were the cuts in the first year. $80 million worth of cuts to stop cabinet ministers' travel, to stop civil servants' travel, publications, the advertising, only back to the 1980 level. That's all. They weren't eliminated.
That Bennett has had blinkers over his eyes and has been pouring money down the drain.
For 2 years, we have on the record, not Barrett saying it or Bennett denying it, on the record, we voted on every one of these cuts. The total in the first year that we proposed was $82 million. The second, just this last year, $76 million.
But surely one of his best moves, Mr. Barrett, have been his guidelines. 6.5 and 5% on public sector wages.
His guidelines were announced on BC TV last February. And he talks about his public statements being a handshake. He announced 8 and 14. Then we left this studio and waited for the House to sit. We waited a few weeks and we were given new guidelines. Then we were given new guidelines. The program was thrown together piecemeal. Then he saw an opportunity to start doing a little union bashing, which is great politics for right-wingers in British Columbia.
Yeah, but what would you have done, Mr. Barrett?
Look, I made it very clear when I was asked during the first week of the strike, you go back to the bargaining table and you realistically set out goals. Bennett said that he was interested in flexibility. That has always been our position. Bennett said bottom loading. That has always been our position. As a matter of fact, our first contract was bottom loaded. Now, what he did not do was allow some room for maneuvering in terms of that bottom loading so that he could meet the same total figure and still meet part of what the union wanted. He wanted a confrontation, not negotiations.
Would you have guidelines at all? Or would, after all, you're the man who was blamed for giving the public service employees, first of all, substantial increases in wages and bargaining rights. Looking back now, with 219,000 people drawing unemployment pay in British Columbia, was that your fatal mistake?
That is not a significant factor in the overall problem we have in this province. It's not a question of whether or not they have bargaining rights. The question is, how are we handling our resources to pay the costs of education and health? We would say to the civil servants that free collective bargaining is there. The SOCREDs haven't taken it away. We sit down and negotiate realistically on what we've got available. A settlement could have been reached a long time ago within the frames of flexibility that Bill Bennett was talking about.
You mean the 8 to 14% one?
You could go as high in some areas as 7 and as low as some areas as 4. There's no need for across-the-board increases for the highly paid civil servants, but there is a need for some bottom loading. Bennett himself has admitted that.
That was rather good to see the Social Credit Cabinet cut back these fancy increases for the 111 government doctors, wasn't it?
Well, you know, it's symbolic. I just cannot believe the kind of ad hoc actions by this government. When Bill Bennett says a handshake is a deal, and then he backs out of the deals that already exist, then you have to question what they're really up to. I don't think there is an economic game plan. I think there is fear in Victoria, fear about facing up to the fact of the really serious economic problems we have.
Are they leaderless?
I think they're decisionless. I think you're going to ask people in the business community who have been waiting for years about specific proposals in terms of natural gas, in terms of mining, in terms of other projects, that they have not had decisions made by this government.
But did you expect the economy to go over the cliff so quickly as it did between the spring and now?
No. We had projections. The Vancouver Sun, some 18 months ago, had the same projections, ran a front-page story predicting a $600 million deficit. The prediction that we had, and was similar to theirs, was wrong by about 8 months. The only fellow who was right was that young man who was the economist with the BC Central Credit Union, who pointed out that the draw on those mega projects would be a drain on the surplus funds.
But is this not a time where, unfortunately, ordinary people and the unemployed must suffer?
Look, we're all going to suffer. We're going to suffer from years of federal and provincial mismanagement in terms of the resource base of this country. We have had Bank Act changes, which W.A.C. Bennett argued against, which I fought against, and I agreed with W.A.C. on those in terms of eliminating fixed mortgages of 20 and 25 years amortization rates. We've had problems in terms of federal and provincial energy policies in giving away our oil and gas at a time when we should have got decent prices to build up funds ahead. And now the same thing is appearing with coal, and when the Japanese now are turning us into a resource colony in regards to coal.
We have committed $1.3 billion of public money into Northeast coal. Would you scrap it?
We cannot scrap it, but I tell you this as I sit here, and I made it very clear when I went to Japan, the price of our coal includes jobs for British Columbians. We want a small steel mill. We want that rail car plant back that the Socreds closed. We want the capacity to build some of those ships to carry the coal. Right now, 4 ships are being built, 2 in Korea, 2 in Belgium. While we have unemployed here, we're going to buy rail cars from Eastern Canada, the United States, while we have unemployed here. France is going to build that conveyor belt. Atkinson Commonwealth of San Francisco is doing $100 million worth of engineering up there. We've got unemployed engineers here. We've got unemployed workers here. If we're going to sell our coal, we want those jobs here.
Is it not too late, though? You couldn't possibly renegotiate the coal deals now. Look at Southeast coal sales slumping.
There is no question that Don Phillips has led us into a blundering situation, and I don't think Bill Bennett has kept himself informed of the rapidly changing coal situation.
Is it too late to correct?
No, it is not too late to correct, because we have other resources on the long term the Japanese do need, and they understand that.
Why can't we just go ahead with public deficit financing on the province's credit to put people back to work, which is our biggest need?
There will have to be some of that in any event. We must go back to the kind of moves made by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who said, and it's appropriate today, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. We do not have all the answers. We do not have a carte blanche to spend our way out of a recession. Loaning money without interest to people who don't need it is not a way of spending our way out of a recession. We must sit down and rationally trade on our only treasures left, and those are our resources.
I don't know. People are confused.
People are confused. People come up to me on the street.
People are afraid of you. They're afraid you get back into power and they'll say, give Fryer 15%.
Look.
You know, settle with them. They're our core of support. They're afraid that you, if you went back in, would be profligate.
Look, Jack, we left money in the till, and we left $400 million worth of assets that have been dissipated away in brick.
Oh, brick.
No one can wipe out that
Talk about brick,
record.
the Warren Report, Heinemann Locke, the BCGEU, the Mortgage Housing Plan. Any bitterness that might be around after the break? Only one person, well, maybe 3, Bennett, Kinsella, and Spector, know when the election will be called, but you're an old hand at tactics. Did you expect the House to be prorogued this week and sometime within the next 7 days and a writ issued for a snap election?
Yes, I think we're heading for an election. We were told that we were coming back to the House to deal with the economic situation. The first bill that was put on the order paper was the redistribution or the gerrymandering bill. I've tried twice to get an emergency debate on the economy featuring unemployment, both times turned down. I believe they are seriously considering closure, ramming through that bill, and going in with 7 more Socred seats.
Surely you don't mean a gerrymandering bill as such by the commissioner?
Not by the commissioner. This is the government's decision. The commissioner only did what he was told to do in a short period of time, and he keeps on apologizing in the report. Your own station did an analysis of how he didn't stick to his own formula. The point is that the government scooped up this report on the basis of the defined terms given to Warren. It's not Warren's fault. They wanted a gerrymander. They got it under their terms, and they're going to ram it through the House, in my opinion.
This means that you're being very defeatist. With the 7 extra seats, the 6 extra multiples and 1 extra triple, you are obviously pessimistic that you could win any of these seats.
Look, they're going to try.
Why wouldn't they go split? Why wouldn't you clean up?
First of all, I don't know what the reality. Look, people at home in their own living rooms who have to look at politics, which is at its best not always clean. This is a dirty part of politics. It involves cheating. Now, people at home are going to have to make a decision whether or not they want to vote for a government that plans to cheat. It's hardly a lesson for our young people. It's hardly a lesson for sports teams, but that's the reality we're dealing with. Now, he feels he needs that extra edge to win an election. If that's the case, the people of British Columbia must decide. We will give a fight, we have a fighting chance, and we will do our best. But we're going to let everybody know from the beginning that we're not going to stand for the cheating as long as we're sitting there.
The bill that you call the gerrymander bill is on the floor right now.
Right now.
Are you going to filibuster that bill?
Well, we haven't even started a filibuster. We're still in second reading, but it'll be a long time before they get that bill. If he's planning on calling an election within the next few weeks, forget it, because we're not going to roll over and play dead and see the people of British Columbia be cheated out of their right to decide on who they want for government. Whether it's Bennett, whether it's Barrett, or anyone else, they have a right to do it fairly.
But you're telling me that there will be a filibuster on the Warren report?
We will go through second reading with everyone speaking. If he wants that report by next week, he'll have to bring in closure, and I suspect, Jack, that we will have closure for the first time in the history of British Columbia on a bill like this.
And then what will his election issue be? Put yourself in his place just for a moment if you can.
Well,
if not, I can tell you.
It's difficult for me, although I am a veteran. I agree, and I have read the entrails before, but there's a new dimension. For the first time in the history of British Columbia, we now have the Ontario advisor syndrome, where high-priced people have been hired from the big blue machine of Ontario. First-time injection into BC politics, where outsiders, using modern techniques as they view it from Ontario politics, are manipulating the Social Credit Party in this province. Now, we don't know what the outcome will be, but there is no question that the old days of W.A.C. Bennett or the CCF in terms of the kind of confrontation on raw edge is over. He is being stage managed by hired guns from Ontario. What the impact will be, we don't know.
When was closure last used in the BC House?
I'm not sure, but I think it was, do you remember when Bob Strachan and Bob Bonner had that tremendous dust-up over some property in Delta where a second payment was made? I think that was the only time in my time there. And I'm not sure if absolute closure was used, but there was a secondary payment to some farmland related to the Massey Tunnel.
You expect closure will be used by Bennett's forces?
I believe that they are seriously considering using closure to ram this bill.
And the issue then would be the N.D.P. is obstructing the business of the nation. Let's put these obstructionists to the test on the basis of our new job creation programs.
Well, that could very well be what he says the issue is, but there isn't a single thing on the order paper for job creation other than an amendment to the Mortgage Act. That is all. The first bill they've introduced, and the only thing that is of substance is the redistribution, the Save Social Credit bill that's in front of the House.
Does the mortgage plan, and I'm quoting Jack Monroe partially of the IWA, not have a number of good, sensible features attractive to all people in BC?
There are some aspects of the mortgage plan that are going to be good for some people, but it does not address the problem of the people in a place like Port Alberni, where they are on the edge of losing their homes because there's no protection on foreclosure, and it mounts up debt at the end of the plan.
Would you give protection on foreclosure now?
Yes, 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 particularly to communities like Port Alberni, particularly the small businesses, small family businesses that are seeing their life's work being eroded at this time of recession. Yes, they must be protected. It is not radical. It is not new in terms of small businesses. There is a section in U.S. legislation, the Banking Act of the United States, that protects them. We would invoke the same plan that the U.S. government uses in terms of homeowners. We can stop foreclosure.
But if you were in power, as I recall part of your proposed program, you would raise $1 billion directly to help people with grants for mortgages?
Yes, grants on the basis of the same program that has been brought in, but different financing than Saskatchewan. Now, there are variances. For instance, we said with the Savings and Trust that Social Credit voted for, it permits us to go into the marketplace and borrow money at the prime rate of 16%. We can lend it back out at 12 and 13. We pay the difference. For a service charge of approximately $5 million, we put $100 million into that economy. We service that debt at $5 million a year. We were going to put up $200 million a year over a 5-year period.
But you would make it grants.
Yes, it will be grants, and it is upfront loading to get people into first-time housing and people moving up or down in housing.
So this is the start of your campaign, really, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, we've gone through this on your program in detail, but that is there, and that legislation has been there since 1975.
$1 billion in grants.
Over a 5-year period, $200 million a year.
No foreclosures on small businesses or family residences.
None whatsoever for a period of time of adjustment. The U.S. legislation gives small businesses a year to rearrange.
With a billion deficit, how can we afford, even over 5 years, $1 billion in grants?
I'm not talking about servicing $1 billion. I'm talking about servicing the cost of that money.
Much like his.
Yes, he got the idea originally for the bill that he passed, but what he's done is he's geared it to people who are already eligible for mortgages, and he shuts out that new end opening for most construction in the housing. And he does nothing to save those people who are in desperate shape and who will only add this delayed debt to be faced with it 3 years down the road.
And if he introduces, he being Premier Bennett, introduces closure on the Warren report, you will say this is an arrogant, dictatorial, what would you call it if he does that?
Well, I don't think I'm going to say very much.
You're going to have to sell it to people on the point of principle.
Look, the Vancouver province, the Vancouver Sun, yourself, other leading non-political observers of this province have said it better than I have. Better than I have. If we have reached the point where naked power is going to be used to cheat for a group to get into office in British Columbia, the ultimate decision will not be made on statements by me or by the media, but in the living rooms of the people of this province.
Do you think the people of this province are sufficiently politically conscious at the moment?
I believe...
Or have all the years of affluence not eroded their interest in the principle of politics?
I believe the people of this province are fair, and they will make separate decisions. The other issues in the campaign itself that must be examined are education, our health, and resources. And Jack, this will be a crossroads election. Aside from the cheating and aside from the gerrymandering, people are a lot more sophisticated in this province about politics.
Dave Barrett, leader of the N.D.P. You're called shortly, but not just yet, after this break. Let's get down to the schools. 120 million is to be cut by the end of next year. The teachers are shouting, if you lay us off, we'll strike. Can you possibly support this attitude by the teachers in this time of financial crisis?
The teachers are well equipped to look after themselves. The people who are not well equipped to look after themselves are the students. We are being told incessantly and correctly that we must have a better educated workforce as a means of ensuring our own industrial development. Every time we impair the process of getting a better educated workforce, we are harming our chances of being competitive in that world marketplace. I'm saying to you that in the intensity of education, it is absolutely essential that we have smaller classes and we pay for those smaller classes. In terms of quality, there are serious questions that can and should be addressed by school boards, teachers, and parents. But arbitrary, wholesale cuts, when we can have a year of planning into any kind of changes, are only being made, in my opinion, for political purposes.
All right, question. Do you think that the cuts proposed and ordered by Van der Zalm and company are, at this moment, unnecessary?
I think that they are illogical. I think that if you're going to do the cuts, then we'll sit down and plan a year. What about the bureaucracy that exists? What about duplication that exists? What about asking the school trustees and the teachers themselves to address these problems rather than playing high-profile politics up front?
Well, you saw Van der Zalm last night saying if any of them strike, in effect, he said, if any of them dare to strike, we can replace them if they're off for any period of time by willing teachers.
Well,
what do you say to that?
You cannot take him seriously.
Pardon?
You cannot take Mr. van der Zalm serious.
Why not?
Because he's had a serious traumatic experience with his own cabinet colleagues. He called them gutless a week ago, and then or a few weeks ago, then he was switched into this post. He makes statements off the top of his head and is forced to back down.
Do you think he's being used as a kind of sacrificial lamb by Bennett?
I think Mr. Bennett would like to see the end of Mr. van der Zalm. I do believe that. I believe that he was moved into education to serve the purpose of confrontation with the teachers. Hopefully, Mr. van der Zalm will get his negative reward at the polls, and Mr. Bennett will be rid of him as well.
Well, I suppose you got the support of every teacher just now, and we'll try again with a different form of that question. Are you saying there should be no cuts in teaching staff or classroom budgets in the present crisis?
I'm saying there should be no cuts this year until we sit down with parents, school trustees, and teachers and work out those areas where are priorities. Perhaps we can find those areas within a matter of months. But arbitrary cuts, purely for political purposes, do not serve the children or the parents of this province.
Mr. Barrett, how can you say arbitrary cuts for political purposes when he's going to have a $1 billion deficit? When, as you well know, we've got tens of thousands unemployed in the lumber industry, Southeast coal going down, little firms closing day after day after day. Surely many people think you've got to cut your coat according to today's cloth.
I like what you're saying. Where's the money gone? There was close to $1 billion.
But it's gone.
All right, now
you
let's
agree
talk.
it's gone?
I agree it's gone.
Maybe
now,
bad management. Maybe he's close to some form of...
Let's talk about options in recovering that bad management.
But that takes years.
No, no, no. The Northeast Coal Project, which is threatening the economy of the southeast section of British Columbia, should be immediately reviewed.
Well, that's what Phillips announced the other day, didn't he?
No, Phillips announced the continuation of Dease Lake to nowhere. You know, that's entirely absurd. You saw it on television, bizarre scene. That was a little bit of rivalry for SC television, not Saturday night, but social credit television. That doesn't count.
Are you calling out social credit television?
No, no, I'm calling his performance, that Saturday Night Live performance.
Old Leatherlungs is good showbiz.
Okay, we'll hire him. Maybe we've got money to make out of entertainment with him. The area that we must examine, both with the federal government and the provincial government, is our planning on resources. And that is the area where the only hope of recovery can come from.
All right, in the lumber industry, where we've got tens of thousands, 24,000 unemployed at the moment. Your people once indicated you'd take over the lumber yards, the sawmills, the pulp mills, and run them. That's just a dream, isn't it?
A dream. We bought viable operations, incorporated them into BC Cellulose. You recall that. And that has all been dissipated with brick.
Brick, a magnificent scheme by social credit, surely.
It's the only place in the world where people had the opportunity to buy back what they already own and the chance to lose money on it as well. It has been a disaster for day one. It was conceived for politics, and it has done nothing for British Columbians. It has made Edgar Kaiser rich. It has created serious problems for transportation and coal sales out of southeast British Columbia. I'm not a defender of CPR. I want that to go on the record. Mr. Sinclair knows that. But with the advent of competing sources of supply of coal, that whole infrastructure in southeast is threatened on a competing basis. Their marketing has been a disaster. Their use of the assets acquired, for instance, the sale in the Maritimes at 1/2 the value of leases for oil and gas, were absurd. They have been a disaster from day one.
Brick will be a major hatchet with which you'll beat Bennett over the head.
No, no, no. Brick is a major hatchet which he is beating himself with over the head. He has just lifted one of the most last believable restrictions in 1% centralized ownership. He's taken that away. Brick will be captured at the low cost of those markets, of those shares at this time, by major institutions.
Shouldn't really ask this question, but will. The Heinemann caper, and he has now disappeared from sight. He's still a backbencher, isn't he? On his expense account problems. Are you going to hammer that during the election, or will you let poor Peter disappear quietly into the background? Was he dealt with fairly?
That is almost a personal, tragic story that has some typical foundations in the province of British Columbia. The criticism I have, and it won't be a significant part of the campaign.
It won't be.
No. What took so long, and why the contrast in handling Jack Davis vis-a-vis Heinemann? And those questions have to be looked at.
Well, I don't know. You all set for an election?
I'm always set for election. I'm never set for the results.
Your party has, and I watched you all summer when I could see you, has been very low-level, lackluster. Do you have any trouble in your caucus between the Williams supporters on the left and the Barrett Social Democrats on the right?
I think that we are in better shape than we've ever been. We finished the session on July the 31st. I told as many MLAs to get a rest because we could smell the election coming. As soon as the Warren thing was announced, we had an idea what was going to happen. Our people are well organized, well rested, and ready to go. In terms of policies, we laid it out this March in the proposals of the jobs and the industrial strategy we wanted to follow. It's there. We're ready to go.
You got no television crews running around just now filming you for the campaign? Don't tell me the N.D.P is broke.
No, we're not broke, but we need money. The address is 517 East Broadway.
No, I wouldn't let Bennett do that, and I wouldn't let you do it
We
either.
need money, but we have laid out our program clearly from March on, and we are busy. We've nominated most of our candidates.
But you concede that if he ramrods this through and people don't get the message about the manna from heaven Warren report, he will win the election.
We are underdogs below the underdogs. If he rams this through, we have an uphill struggle, but
Are your polls showing that you are behind your party in personal popularity and behind Bennett?
I haven't seen any polls, but if that were the case, I haven't seen any evidence. Mind you, you know, I'd like to see polls. Normally we get...
Don't you run polls?
Well, we had one about 8 months ago, but normally we get leaks. We get plain brown envelopes where people send us material. If anybody's got the information out there, the address
Social
is...
credit polls. The address for the polls is BCTV, Post Office Box 4700, Vancouver, BC.
Right.
Questions to Dave Barrett after the break. One more question for me. What is your considered opinion of Ottawa's 6 and 5 program for controls on the public sector with voluntary matching in the hard-pressed private sector?
It is not believable. Simply not believable. There has been no evidence that the present Liberal administration has an economic commitment to any kind of economic planning. They have been responding to polls rather than a philosophy. This federal government, I will not vote Tory, but this federal government has outlived its usefulness. I say that not only as a New Democrat, from a partisan point of view, but as a citizen, they are no longer believable.
Well, pretty tough, I must say. Let's go to the phones. Where am I going? Go ahead to Dave Barrett.
Good morning. Mr. Barrett, I just want to say that this attempt at redistribution by the Socreds, or their introduction of legislation for it, I think is the sleaziest kind of opportunism, and I hope that that you will do your best to see if there's any way that this subversion of democracy can be dealt with.
Yeah, there was a way Mr. Barrett could have done himself. You could have appointed a permanent electoral commission when you were in power.
You know, we did. We appointed a commission. We got the commission's results, and we said we now want to set a pattern in this province. Here is a commission with the former Judge Norris, who was the head of it. It has now been delivered to us as government. We will not implement it until an election is over.
Oh.
That is the process we started. We said, thank you for the report. Thank you, Judge Norris. Here are the results. On the shelf, election over. So that no one can charge the government of the day having any influence in the report or using the report for their benefit.
So you're as clean as a whistle on that one?
Well, the record is absolutely clear on that basis.
Go ahead to Dave Barrett.
Yeah, concerning the housing situation, the majority of the people, I would understand, rent and not own. And I was wondering if you plan to do anything concerning the renters, concerning grants or anything like that.
Yes, part of the recovery program that we spelled out in March, we made it very clear that we intend to go into affordable housing, rental accommodation, and co-ops. When we first tried to introduce co-op housing in British Columbia, it was largely unknown. And we did a terrible job as a government in explaining the savings and the advantages of co-op and other affordable schemes. Now, after passage of time, I think public reception to co-op housing is far better. We intend to go in with federal government matching grants, CMHC, into co-op housing and affordable housing. We also intend to bring in back the kind of rent controls that were fair and firm. Fair and firm to everyone in this province.
Are you saying back to the old 10% rent controls or whatever the appropriate figure is? Wasn't that widely savaged as a reason for the lack of rental housing even when times were good?
That was savaging for political purposes. Time has proven that those controls were fair and valid, and they must be extended, and this is a new dimension, and I do not back away from it. They must be extended to small businesses in this province who are being gouged out of their own operations by leases and rents that have been exorbitantly raised.
Barrett says bring back rent controls for both small businesses and for renters.
That is correct.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Webster.
Yeah.
Mr. Barrett, I'm a school trustee in this province, and obviously I'm concerned about the present problems with education.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if I can just get a yes or no answer.
Yeah.
Will you, if you're elected the next government, restore funding to education to a minimum the levels that existed last May before the second round of cuts?
Yes, because you are legally entitled to those negotiated budgets that were negotiated by the government of the day. I believe it is illegal and immoral to go back on all the work done by the school trustees and the government on those budgets. As for the future, it is absolutely essential for us as a government to challenge you trustees to give you more authority, laying out criteria and budgeting on the basis of what you need for your own area. Long-term financing must be stabilized by completing the Math Commission's work. That will take at least another year.
Fair enough, Mr. Barrett. The Math Commission was a good commission.
Yeah.
But you and I think, probably agree that the educational system has become fat, sloppy, feather-bedded, overweighted with administrators, with the emphasis on the high salaries at the wrong end of the system.
I agree that any system can stand a measure of cuts, but they must be done logically and validly. Look, Jack, the government also must mean what it says. At the same time they're cutting off teachers, Pat McGeer is still trying to use the system to protect his tenure at UBC. Hardly an example of security. I find that distasteful.
Oh, you mean his conflict of interest?
Exactly.
As in between a cabinet minister and a professor?
Exactly.
And his big hospital out there.
He's the fellow that's saying that these are the students who need increased technological skills, increased ability to handle science and technology. He's the fellow that has sat mute while these cuts take place, affecting teachers and students, and he's the fellow who's trying to get the rules bent to protect his job. I think it's hypocritical.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Barrett, I hope Mr. Bennett calls the election. I'll welcome it. I work for BC Rail. It's been savaged by this depression in British Columbia. One of the things that you tried to do while you were the Premier of British Columbia was to negotiate a deal with the Alaska pipeline, I believe it was, where they would pipeline to a certain terminal in Alaska, and BC Rail would hook up with it and bring the crude to Cherry Point in Washington. Yeah. Can this still be negotiated?
The railway to Alaska can and must be an eventual goal. The oil transportation now, the prospects are absolutely minimal on that. But during our first term in opposition, after we were defeated, I met with the Carter administration's cabinet minister responsible for transportation, Captain Harry Terry of British Columbia, went with me. I then was in Alaska speaking to a special joint session of the House and Senate with Governor Jay Hammond, who was the governor at that time.
That's pie in the sky, Mr. Barrett.
No, no, no. The Americans need the land link through to Alaska. We have paid our share. The federal government would have to pay Yukon's share. The Americans are willing and made that commitment, willing to talk about a publicly owned joint railroad to Alaska.
Can BC Rail survive? Have we just got to continue pumping funds from general revenue in to keep it afloat, bankrupt as it is?
The Social Credit government did one thing after we were defeated that was wise. They set up the Mackenzie Royal Commission. That commission did an excellent job on the railroad, pointing out the pitfalls and the possibilities. The one area that came out was a confirmation that if the railroad is finished through to Alaska with American participation, it will be, for the first time in its history, potentially a paying way to go.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
Dave. I'd just like to get your view on how that resources works that you're talking about. What's all involved?
Well, first of all, you've got to sell the products, haven't you?
Yes, we've got to sell the products.
On a falling world market.
Yeah. Now, look, the sale of the products includes not just money, but includes the infrastructure as well. For example, in Northeast Coal, we were negotiating for a small steel mill. We had our rail car plant in place, paid for, cash up front. That was closed down by the Socreds. They have given away the shipbuilding contracts to Korea and Belgium, the conveyor to France. I went through all of this.
Yeah.
Now, I'm pointing out that the price of the product includes jobs here at home. That's where the selling has not been done.
If you can get the price on the world market.
Look, Jack, we can get the equal price to others in the world market. That means higher costs at home. We're aware of that. But we can make up those higher costs by demanding that transportation and manufacturing associated with the resource is partly done here in British Columbia.
It's the old moderate socialist Dave Barrett, mixed free enterprise economy, help small business, and like social credit, don't cut human resources. They haven't been cut. They're overexpended $150 million.
I ask people to quietly compare the two administrations. We learned a great deal. We made some mistakes. We made some tremendous moves. Overall, Jack, when we left office, we had reduced the parity bond debt by $100 million. There was close to $1 billion left in special funds, and we had $400 million worth of assets that are now gone. Please, all I want people to do is forget labels and think. We cannot give away our treasures and expect to go into debt forever.
Mind you, we can't recover until the American lumber market picks up. We're still
we can
the
set
tail
this,
of the American dog.
No question, and I made that very clear. The whole mess is not entirely the blame of social credit. I make that very clear.
To liberals, now to a more.
They're partly to blame, but we are in a worldwide recession. What we must do is regroup and build on our particular strengths, and those strengths are our resources.
One more session with Dave Barrett, after the break. With propaganda, sees the chairman of the 6 and 5 Committee for Ottawa. His name is Ian Sinclair.
That's why Trudeau's hired him, because he's got such a generous heart.
My thanks to Dave Barrett. Next, Ian Sinclair, after the break. Ian Sinclair has, for the past many years, been one of the most visible and senior, if not the most senior, business executive in the country. He was the head man in CPR. He's now chairman of Canadian Pacific Enterprises, which is their non-transportation group. And much to my surprise, and I'm sure to other people too, he has become chairman for the Trudeau government of the 6 and 5 Committee. Is this a paid job or an unpaid job, Mr. Sinclair?
Well, first, it isn't the government's committee, it's a Canadian committee. And secondly, it's not paid.
What do you mean a Canadian committee? Was it not set up by the government?
Oh, yes, but the government initiated it, but we have people there that are not connected with government in any way, and we've got all political stripes involved in it.
Including the N.D.P?
No, they're not in business as far as I know, except that...
It's a businessman's committee?
That's correct.
And what is your function supposed to be? I mean, the function of the committee?
The function of the committee is to assist in fighting inflation by advancing the restraint program in the private sector and also having some discussions with provincial governments.
Now, are you pleased with the lines laid down most recently by social credit of 6.5 and 5 in public sector employees?
Yes, that's within shooting distance of the targets we have.
Well, I know a prominent businessman, and you know him too, called C. Calvert Knudsen, who says, why should government employees on their 6 and 5 do any better than the taxpayers who foot the bill? is there need at all, he's saying, for any increase for government employees anywhere in times of crisis?
Well, I don't know what Cal Knutson had in mind, but my view is that you take a look at the average level of pay in the civil service and in comparable situations outside of government, and if they're out of step, well, so be it. But nevertheless, I don't think that you should pick them out for any different treatment and freeze them. There'll be people in the private sector frozen, and maybe some in the public sector should be frozen, but overall, if we can come to within 6 and 5, I think that's not bad.
But people in the private sector are only frozen by economic circumstances. There are no official laws which freeze anything other at the moment other than, broadly speaking, public sector wages.
That is correct. The only place where there's a legislative fiat is in the public sector, extended to CP Rail for particular reasons of negotiation and joint negotiations and other railways under joint negotiation. But other than that, you're correct, Jack.
So the CP rail workers got a rollback, didn't they? They were due to get 9% on COLA in the second year, and they were rolled back to 5%.
Yes, that's correct. They went to the same level as the people that work for Canadian National.
Now, you're asking private business to say, don't give your employees an increase of more than 6 and 5 in the next 2 years.
What we're asking them to do is to keep their personnel costs within the 6 and 5 guidelines, within the 6 and 5 guidelines. Some of them won't be able to give them anything. Economic circumstances will make that impossible. In other cases, there may be something over in the wage level higher than 6 because of experience factors or somebody moving in the classification, and that also is in the government. And so I think it's generally looked upon as wages and prices, but really what you're talking about are personnel costs and, on the other side of the coin, profit margins or price levels.
So therefore, to touch the question, part of your message is to businessmen, keep your personnel costs down and lay off if necessary.
Oh, I don't say lay off, because the whole thrust of this program is to create jobs. It isn't to reduce the jobs. It's to create them.
How can it create jobs? We've got 1.3 million unemployed at the moment.
Well, the way we're going to create...
20 billion deficit coming up in the federal government.
Yes. Well, the way we're going to create jobs is to have the inflation factor come down. Following that, interest costs will come down. Profit margins will increase as these costs come down. And investment, which is now being postponed, deferred, or abandoned, will come back into force. That creates jobs. The private sector is the engine that creates the jobs. And this is what we're thrusting and trying to do.
Have you not lost faith in the private sector business a bit? Look at us in British Columbia. The American market is down the tube. Lumber market, we're down the tube. And you must know that as well as anyone because of the vast holdings that CP has in BC, doesn't it?
It has a lot of very, very large interests in the province of British Columbia, and we're having a very difficult time in the forest products industry. There's no question about it.
Do you see any hope for recovery shortly?
Well, if interest rates will come down, I think that you will see a slow pickup in housing, and the lumber industry is going to maybe at the bottom now. Unfortunately, I still think that there may be a little slippage in pulp. Maybe news is bottomed out. I would not hold out any hope for a rapid recovery, but I think possibly we can see the signs of it bottoming out.
Well, what do you say to the businessman or the man in the street who says to you, oh, that's great, 6% and 5% for civil servants, free enterprise are really controlled by the markets, but this damn government in Ottawa, I use the word advisedly, thrusts at us these incredible increases, 16% in gas this year, 31% next year, extra taxes on beer, wine, cigarettes. I mean, it seems like hypocrisy.
Well, let me take a look at the change in energy prices. Whether you agree with it or not, the government took a decision not to allow energy prices to move with world prices for crude. Quite frankly, I think they should have taken their medicine at the time it was there. But that was a policy decision and was brought about by regional differentiations in our country. So I can understand the reason for it. And so you have to pay for it, and we're paying for it now. And once we get to world scale in crude, 75% of the gate, Chicago gate, I think you will find, again, a significant fall off in our inflation rate and coming more in line with some other factors.
How can our inflation rate fall off if we are paying, you mean we'll reduce consumption of gas and oil and cut our coat according to our cloth?
Well, that's part of the story, but maybe that our consumption would have come down faster, and if we had allowed the price increases to go in more effectively and quicker. But I think the program may not have had all the results that the people that put it into effect wanted, but looking back on it, it had its disabilities, but it also had its pluses in this country. You've got to remember we did have a pretty good inflation rate comparatively a couple of years back, and part of that was because energy costs were being restrained.
More with Ian Sinclair, chairman of the Canadian Committee.
Private sector, 6-5 private sector committee.
6-5 private. You're not concerned with the civil servants at all?
No.
You're concerned with 6-5 private sector?
That's correct.
And things look bad, don't they?
No, I think we're making quite a bit of yards, Jack.
More after the break. Some of you will remember, how many years ago is it when Bennett said to you, BC is not for sale, and chopped you off at the pass when you were trying to take control of Mac and Blow? How long ago is that?
Oh, 3 or 4 years ago.
3 or 4 years ago. Maybe you were lucky that Bennett chopped you off at the pass.
I don't know. I don't think so. Mac Blow's a good company. Great assets, good people.
But they're the classic case in that they make it perfectly clear that they live or die by the profit or loss, aren't they?
Oh, correct.
They're the big people, or the kind of big people like yourself, who live in the marketplace each and every day. Now, next question from me. Where do you really think the economy will go? I mean, the 6 and 5 seems somewhat pathetic. Let me start again. Do you think that we should never have had free collective bargaining for civil servants? Was that the real trouble?
No, I don't. And let me pick up from where you were going, Jack, if I may, and that is 6 of 5 is not in itself going to carry the inflation factor down, but it is only one part of the government program. I heard what Mr. Barrett said, and that is wrong. There is a program. There is monetary restraint, and Mr. Bowie in the central bank has done an excellent job. And I think every well-thinking and proper person approaching the financial thing will give him credit. Now, the other side, the fiscal side, has had its problems. You mentioned the size of the deficit. Now, the increase in that deficit, which was stupendous in the last 6 months, was largely caused by the inflationary factor and transfer payments. So, even in the budget...
Just stop there for a moment. The inflationary factor and transfer payments. You're talking about the monies paid on statutory deals to the provinces and to individuals.
And unemployment insurance.
Unemployment insurance.
Yeah.
And all the social costs and medical payments and all the rest of it. The inflation and that.
Correct.
But that government in Ottawa has done nothing, has it, to cut back any of these transfer payments?
Well, it has done something in the fiscal side on restraint. It has limited, for instance, index pensions in the civil service to 6 and 5, which would have otherwise moved with the total amount of inflation.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yes.
You've kept that a secret.
No, no, you didn't read all the budget. That's all. You got tired and went to bed, Jack.
Right.
But the other thing that they did, which is a factor in this, is that they have, in 1983, limited the indexation of the classifications for income tax to 6 and 5. Mm-hmm. And it takes a lot of initiative and courage to increase taxes, and that's really what that is, in a time of recession. And that has a bigger impact, of course, in the higher echelons than it has on the lower echelons.
Two things you said there. They've limited the indexing of civil servants' pensions to 6 and 5% for the next 2 years. That was basically a very bad thing to be done in the first place, wasn't it? Indexing pensions to the cost of living.
I think so, but nevertheless, having made a mistake, they're trying to correct it in part.
And
Get a little credit for that.
Now, as far as our income tax deductions are concerned, that the inflation factor there is similarly limited.
Correct.
Now, what else has been limited? I'll accept your point on the national energy policy, you know, that we're going to have to come to world prices someday and live with the costs of that.
Correct.
What else has been done? What about airline fares?
Well, airline fares have been restricted, but after all, they have fenced in the giveaway fares or the elasticity of demand fares or the promotional fares, call them what you will, because they were beyond the realm of the purpose of where they were put in was to stimulate travel. But there is a restraint in there, and I'd like to point out, too, that the other side in here, right in Vancouver, the machinists did fall into the 6 and 5 program with this last settlement, and there's another sector of CPR which is also falling into that. And so people who say it's all one-sided and it all has to be covered by legislative fiat, Jack, are wrong. People generally, and Canadians in particular, in my opinion, don't have to be forced to do by law what they know has to be done.
By common sense.
That's right.
Now, at the same time, though, if I'm left of centre at all, I'm going to say, damn it, there are all kinds of wage controls down the pike at here now, but there are no price controls. How do you answer people who say, if you're going to control wages, you've got to control prices?
Well, this committee that I'm the chairman of, the 6-5 Private Sector Committee, is not only working on the wage side, we're also working very hard, Jack, on the price side, and we've had good response to that. The Food Processors Association have been very supportive on the problem of price increases, and they have said they'll keep it within 6, given away that if there is a disaster and farm gate because of frost, there's no peaches or pears or something else, they'll have to pass that on. But given a reasonable flow of produce and their production costs, they're going to keep them within that. Now, they're just one. Snyder's, General Foods, many, many companies have indicated that they're going to operate on the price side, on the price side.
Out of the goodness of their heart?
No, 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 no. Not out of the goodness of their hearts at all. Not at all. Just because they believe that some action has to be taken to bring this inflation down and to change people's expectations and to have confidence return to this country and to this economy. Not out of the goodness of their heart. Just good, damn hard business sense.
Now, I know you're not political, and I know you're prepared to criticize the government, and you have done on the program this morning. But don't you really think it's time we had any kind of a change to establish confidence in the country? That's what we lack at the moment. Confidence in our political leadership, both federally and, in this case, provincially. We lack it.
Well, I think that once you've been in power, as I visualize it and as I see it, and if once you've had political power, after the people get used to you a little bit, all they can see are the warts. They don't see any of the good things you do. And I look at our government in Ottawa, and I see there people of dedication, people of hard work, and people of intelligence. And I look around and I say to myself, they work hard, they try, and all they get is abuse. And I'm quite sure that Jack Webster or Ian Sinclair wouldn't take it.
No, we tell them to keep it.
Yes.
But can you still see the warts?
Oh, everybody's got some, even you.
Not me, I'm perfect. Time for a couple of calls to Ian Sinclair after the break. Ian Sinclair, mind you can afford it, is the unpaid chairman of the Private Sector Committee of the 6 and 5 people from Ottawa. I wanted to ask you a question. Don't often get a chance to talk to you. Is there room in this country for 2 airlines and 2 major railroad companies? Or would it not be more efficient and better run if we just had the one Crown Corporation for airlines, coast to coast, and one railway coast to coast?
Absolutely not. People in this country have a right of freedom of choice. Having 2 airlines gives them that. Having 2 railways gives them that. And also, it gives the people and it gives the management of each company an opportunity of a standard of comparison, both from a business standpoint and both from a democratic standpoint. A country such as Canada that depends so much on transportation certainly needs 2 national carriers.
And do you think it makes for more efficiency? Although there are people, as you well know, who would like to have seen CPR squeezed out long ago.
Oh, I know that.
Yeah, but we must have the both.
I think so.
Efficiency is not the answer. Now, what about the CRTC? What about these kind of rates? What about the telephone companies? Mother Bell and BC Tel and all the rest of them. Are they going to be controlled under the 6 and 5 of the government program?
Well, Bell have already announced that they're keeping within the 6 and 5, and I'm quite sure, I think, yes, I have seen. I think BC Tel have also said that. I think I've read that in the press.
Well, I was off so long this summer, I can't remember.
We can't. Chasing those sheep.
Go ahead, please, to Ian Sinclair.
Mr. Webster.
Yes.
I've heard you going on about this indexed pension business for a long, long while now.
Have you a question for Mr. Sinclair?
Beg pardon?
Have you a question for Mr. Sinclair?
All right, Mr. Sinclair. Mr. Webster's been going on about this indexed pension business, but as the husband of a federal civil servant, I would like to tell you that ever since she's been a civil servant, she has paid into a special fund extra monies to have this pension indexed.
One moment, please. I'm not going into all the detail. Do you happen to know the answer to the question? I won't give mine. Whether or not civil servants, in fact, contribute to the full indexation of their pensions down the years?
Every report I've seen into that question says that they do not.
Thank you. That they do not. They can't.
That's
I mean,
right.
look at some of these pensions, if the COLA keeps going up, that retired politicians will have.
That's correct, Jack.
Dreadful, isn't it?
It's too high. Yes, Jack.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Webster.
Yes.
My question to Mr. Sinclair is, I read in the Financial Post several weeks ago that most federal civil servants, approximately 60 to 65%, are covered by a special agreement which gives them an additional 4% irrespective of whatever negotiations are made between the union and the government as far as the raises go. So really, they're not going to be getting 5 and 6, or pardon me, 6 and 5, but they're going to be getting 6 and 9. Is that not correct?
Well, any person in the civil service, under the act that was passed by Parliament, under $49,000 a year, is able to get his service or merit increases up to a maximum of 4%. I understand that that affects about 50% that come within that classification, and the average, I understand, will be somewhere around 3%. Now, in private industry, we will have that too. We have experience factors within groups, and we have people who, for instance, join us as an engineer. He gets a little more experience, and he will continue to get those increments. In the civil service, that is taken care of in these classifications.
And you feel that's justified?
Oh, yes.
But,
oh, yes.
sir, what about the people that don't have this? What about the small companies where people don't have a 4% clause and are being asked to take only 6 and 5? Aren't they being diluted because most people will be getting 6 and 10 rather than 6 and 5?
Well, once again, I say you can't exceed the limit there. So if you're already at the limit in the civil service to your classification, you will only get 6. In smaller companies, and I don't know anything about agreements in smaller companies, but I think most companies do have service adjustments. And as people get more experience, they do move forward.
But he made a good point, this man, but which most of us didn't know. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Jack.
Yeah.
Look, don't you think that the people are really getting shafted by our government?
Hold on, please. I'm sorry I haven't got time to get him through on his shafted question. But what do you say to allegations, very briefly, that you are now dispensing propaganda on behalf of a sloppy, profligate government? That's Fotheringham.
Well, he's an adjectival rogue. That's what he is.
Fotheringham is an adjectival rogue.
That's right.
Tiny, perfect columnist. My thanks to Ian Sinclair. I'll be back after the break. We should have a top Mountie on tomorrow morning if there's further need for public help in the Clearwater tragedies. We're going to have the ambassador from Egypt, or the Egyptian ambassador to Canada, and a fellow called Jonathan Baker who's running for something or other around this area. I can't quite remember what it is. That's it. See you tomorrow at 9 a.m. precisely.